issue to bring it forth for you today is to see if you're ready to send out a committee recommendation. I would just say, as I said last time, just having this in place doesn't mean you have to confirm anybody. So you could report out enacting this position description if you think it's satisfactory. That really doesn't influence or say whether or not you're confirming the executive's nominee.
All right. Would the executive branch want to add anything?
Good morning.
Morning.
Council members. I would just like to add that I echo her response. The process for today is just approving the regulation for the position to kind of be back enacted and put back into play. As she outlined, there are several interviews upcoming this week, whether it's with the deputy or the director candidate, that you guys will have the opportunity to make your decision on.
All right. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. So I have a couple questions. Some of these questions I've asked privately when I was meeting with the individual candidates, but I think it's important that since they're based on comments that were made publicly, I think it's important to just flesh them out publicly. So my understanding, and just correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but the original plan was the director was going to have more of a focus on economic development. The deputy director is going to have more of a focus on housing. That since has changed. Both the director candidate and the deputy director candidate that the administration is looking to put forward are both have extensive housing backgrounds. Could you just explain how that's going to work, what that's going to look like, what we should expect when we have a conversation at the council about, say, affordable housing? Who should we expect? The deputy director? Should we expect the director? Who's going to be the point person on these types of matters?
So I'll answer your second part first. I believe that based on the nature and the details of whatever housing matter is being brought to you, they will make a decision on who will be there with the director or the deputy. I don't think at this time we can say that, yes, the deputy will be there for all housing matters and the director will not. I think that they both bring a strong wealth of housing experience to the table, and they both will be utilized in that way to support the housing efforts of the county. The other piece that you mentioned regarding the economic development background in the director, as we are fortunate enough to have both of these two highly qualified candidates, I believe that as they already house a piece of economic development and community development underneath their umbrella, we are going for the candidate who could make the best use of the talents and the subject matter expertise needed for DHCA as it stands right now.
I appreciate that. I know we keep going back and forth on this. I happen to think that community development is different than economic development. Those are two different roles. Community development is generally done within departments of housing nationally. I mean, that is the standard approach, whereas economic development generally is done elsewhere, either through an independent outside agency or within government or some combination thereof. But I appreciate the comments. I'm still not completely understanding what the breakdown is. I understand that you'll work that out. I think I do have some concerns about the timing of this, to bring on a director and a deputy director at the same time that has significant impact and overlap on each other, not have the director have a say in who the deputy is and what the layout is of the department that he is then going to lead or is being asked to lead. I have some concerns there, and in bringing in a program description based on a candidate that you already have in mind, as opposed to figuring out what the best program description is and then going out and recruiting the best candidate based off of that, I think would be a better process personally. But I'm not the county executive. I'm a council member. I think it's important that I note my concerns with the process and the timing and how this has gone out sequentially, which was one of the reasons why I had suggested that we delay this to begin with. I still have some concerns with the timing. I think that the process is not in what I would consider to be the most appropriate order, where you bring in the lead person in the agency, you have that person help you to determine how you're going to set up the agency with deputies and managers, et cetera, and then you move forward with the strategic direction of the executive and the organizational advice of the person you're asking to run the day-to-day operations of the department. But not my decision to make. I respect the role here, but I think it's important that I note the concern.
I will just respond by saying, yes, I understand the thought process of, in an ideal or a better structured fashion, it would look a little differently. But what I would say is that the administration is trying to exercise a somewhat sense of urgency to get this department some leadership that it needs, even though it has current leadership that has done extremely well in the absence of both of these positions, one for 10 plus years. We believe that, based on the expertise of the people who are actually putting these candidates in front of you, that they will provide the best resources and skills and expertise to the DHCA department and allow it to grow from there.
Your mic was on, right?
Yeah, I turned it off.
Okay. All right, well, I think our prospective DHC director and deputy director are going to be asking a lot of questions of our existing departmental staff. So, the expertise level does not appear to be as significant for the candidates coming in as it is for the people running the department now. And I'm just curious how it's going to work, frankly. But that's the county executive's prerogative, I guess. The candidate for deputy director appears to have a very narrow set of experiences in housing, looks to me like. I mean, it's mortgages and closing mortgages. Like, I'm sure there's something I'm missing there, but it doesn't look like a very strong array of experiences that you would normally expect to come in at a high level of policy across a range of functions in a department. But that's okay. If that's the way you want to do it. I don't know what to say exactly. I think these candidates are probably better than I expected in some respect, and so I'm not going to complain too much, but I do want to talk to the director nominee. We'll talk tomorrow about the HIF and kind of bringing transparency to the HIF. I think that candidate has a lot potentially to offer there. But there we go. All right. So I think I'll approve these myself. If my colleague joins me, that'll be a majority. I'm sure Mr. Giolando will also concur, but you'll follow up with him. He'll probably add himself. He should be here any moment. Is there any?
Yeah, and I would just say he was comfortable moving forward with it last year.
Yeah, exactly.
The two of us really, just to give him credit for his position, he was ready to move forward at the last meeting. We, based on my discomfort, the chair very graciously joined me, so I would expect him to be supportive.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next item is returning to the trends report. Good morning. All right, the A-team. Here we go. What do we have here? Pam, we're returning to where we are, mid-sentence.
Good morning. We first had, the first part of this briefing came on June 24th. It was part of a double briefing that the PHED committee was receiving. One was on the missing middle housing study, and the second was on this trends report. This is looking at population growth, housing, and jobs since 1990. So what you have today is the planning department is back, and they're going to recap a few of the things you heard on the first portion of that briefing, just to give you the whole overview in one sitting, but then they'll really focus more on the pieces that you didn't hear last time. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. McCarthy to get started.
Good morning. Thank you. We're pleased to have a chance to come back and finish our presentation. Wanted to start just by introducing my colleagues who you don't see as much. Lisa Gavoni, our housing planner, who you see all the time, but then we also have Corinne Blackford, our forecaster and employment specialist, and then on the end, Pamela Zorich, our lead demographer. So I'm going to go through the report and they'll chime in. Does this keyboard do the slides or?
Yeah, the keyboard should.
You have the mouse this morning?
The mouse is usually better.
Okay, so Pamela Zorich is the demographer. So tell me about that work. Where do you intersect with all the work that we see here? I'm sure you're in between the lines of most things, but.
Exactly, and I enjoy a close relationship to several of the departments, like the Health and Human Services, and, working with, in the past, it's been close relationships with Lisa with the housing, working with the master plans in the planning department is probably one of my primary roles, as far as like figuring out, who's in the community that we're planning for, scoping out the needs there.
Okay, interesting. And, sorry, your name again?
Corinne Blackford.
Corinne. And remind me your work again?
Sure. So I'm leading the forecast with the COG team, the Council of Governments, the cooperative forecast that we do with the other jurisdictions.
Morning.
And I also do employment research for the Department of Planning, but also for other agencies that are interested in jobs numbers or resident employment numbers.
Okay. Didn't know we had a member of our team who crunched those numbers. That's great to hear. Okay.
Yeah, and this report we did in-house with staff, so we all really wrote the report, so I wanted to bring them today.
Perfect.
So as I mentioned, we'll cover the employment section that we didn't get to last time. We did a small amount of research to address some of the specific questions you'd had on previous sections, talk about implications for the general plan, and then we can go back to any of the other slides if you wanted to spend more time on things we had showed previously. Just to recap, the goals of this report were to provide context for the general plan update by looking at existing conditions on population, housing, and employment. And we focused on the question of what's changed since 1993. Provided a good 25-year plus period to look at to cover changes in the county. Oh, very sensitive. So starting with employment, there's two types of employment we study. Resident employment, which is where the industries residents work in, regardless of where those jobs are located. And then also what we call at-place employment, and those are jobs physically located in the county. And reporting on those is from different data sets, so we look at each separately. So at the workforce, resident employment, we have the second largest workforce in the region behind Fairfax. Nearly 600,000 Montgomery County residents are employed. This workforce grew by about 31% since 1990, and that's tied to overall population growth. The distribution of employment, there's been some small changes. The percentage of residents employed in the private sector increased from 68% to 73%. The percentage of residents in the federal government declined slightly from 15% to 13%. And the percentage of residents in state and local government stayed the same at about 8%. And the percentage of residents who reported being self-employed declined slightly from 7% to 6%. Now, the private sector includes federal contractors, so it makes it challenging for us to tease out what is, purely private sector employment separate from the federal government versus private sector employment including the federal government. But overall, we're still, heavily service-based economy, dependent heavily on the federal government.
So can I ask, our workforce is the second largest regionally. What is DC? What is Fairfax? What is Prince George's?
Fairfax is slightly bigger. I don't have the other numbers on hand. It's something we can come back to you with.
Yeah, so it's in the main trends report on page 68, and we sort of have this little chart. I don't know can you see it from here? See, orange is us, and the top line is Fairfax. So we're nearly neck and neck with Fairfax, followed by Prince George's, and on down the line. But those top four, you can see there are all of,
And is the share of the population that is employed relatively similar across these
yes,
jurisdictions?
exactly.
It's
So
really the
Fairfax
size.
has a little bit more of a population than we do, and they have a correspondingly larger workforce. But it's absolutely comparable.
So here, the private sector numbers and the federal government numbers, a federal contractor that only does work with the federal government would still be considered a private sector company for the purpose of this.
Exactly. We can look at industries and kind of understand which industries are more heavily dependent on the private or the federal
Right.
sector, but we don't know unless you look at an individual employer whether
Right.
their business base is primarily contracting or it includes others.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's an important statistic, but it doesn't really tell the real story. 'Cause the real story is direct federal spending and how much we rely on direct
That's true.
federal spending, I think, is really the,
Right, so so to get at that, we would look at federal procurement dollars and where those are distributed across the region. And we do have some data on that we can provide to you. How much in federal spending do we get from different parts of the government relative to other jurisdictions?
particularly like non-military health. I mean,
Right,
I think
things like that.
Could you
national leader.
provide us some of that? I'm really
Yeah.
intrigued to see the role of the federal government procurement in the Tyson-Dulles corridor in Northern Virginia generally. I feel like 20 years into the war on terrorism, it's got to be government spending that's driving a lot of that. But I'm curious what the
Yeah.
share is generally. People always describe Northern Virginia as being more business friendly and perhaps, but I think it's government spending that's driving a lot of it too. So it's government, the issue of the politics of the region may be overstated relative to just more government is happening there. There's more spending on, but I'd like to know some data.
Yeah, and I mean, it's difficult for us to precisely quantify that, but we have some data, and we can also refer you to some studies that have been done on that exact issue.
If you could, and I had asked Jeanette Chapman for some of that information recently, so she said she was pulling something together, so I might just check in with her so as you don't have to duplicate anything. Good. I can't see your light. But go ahead. Keep going, Caroline. We're going to try to get through today. I don't know.
So this graph provides the breakdown of employment for residents by industry. And essentially the story is that the two top industry that were largest in 1990 have grown even more concentrated today. And they are the blue line, education, health, and social services, and then the orange line, which is professional, scientific management, administrative, and waste management services. They had a third of all employment in 1990 and over 40% today. The other sectors, it's sort of a mix. Overall, they've stayed relatively more flat.
So retail has come down a lot. That's just the broad shift away from retail generally?
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Retail. The other thing that we know in the report, construction's gone kind of up and down with sort of on the declining side. And I think that's a pretty big challenge both for the industry when we want growth, and construction historically have been more middle wage jobs.
What is information? Is that IT?
Yeah, it's a little bit IT, it's a little bit newspapers, communication.
Yeah, it's mostly publishing, actually. A lot of this sort of information technology is going to fall under like computer development, and that's called a technical service. So it's actually a lot of like communications related services, actually.
Fire, and what is fire?
Financial and insurance and real estate.
So the technical, like IT, is that under other services, or am I just missing?
No, That's going to be in the orange line, the professional scientific services.
Waste management services and IT are in the same, lumped in the same
Yeah,
category.
so the resident data, and we can piece this out for you if you like, we can further disaggregate this. The way the census reports resident employment is different than the way we report like our actual physical jobs numbers, but they do lump them together. But waste management services includes like office-based jobs, like caring for office buildings.
Custodial staff.
Exactly.
So we have IT, like somebody who is a coder and somebody who's a janitor would be lumped into the same
Yes,
Lab.
demographic.
If it's scientific, is that your biotech?
yes. And these are disaggregated further. When you look
Yeah.
at place employment, it's a little better.
Yeah, I get doing it with the census data, but for the purpose of us understanding what the breakdown is of the workforce and how it's changed, I don't know that this breaks it down in a way that would be digestible.
Yeah, if you guys want, we can give you that category specifically broken down.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think we'd be interested, and I suspect education, health, social services growth is probably mostly in health, right? I mean, there's not, unless, is education a
Been a lot
private
of
sector? Is there a
It's
private?
not education, yeah, it's mainly health and, what's it called?
Now, we do have a private sector education cluster here with Kaplan, and
Sure, we do, it's very small, actually.
it's quite small.
I'd personally like to see, good morning, everybody, both of those top two broken out.
Okay.
You know, education, health, social services, and I think there's a lot embedded in those.
I think we want to see everything broken out.
Yeah, well, the bottom ones are a little more, detailed, you know, a little more specific, industry specific, you know, as opposed to those other ones, but.
And that's why I started with the scope of this report was to look broadly at what's changed since 1990, but we're more than happy to come back with some more refined analysis for you.
But it's just tough to understand what's changed because between waste management services and technology, I mean, I can't really, I mean, there's not much there that we could decipher in terms of, you know, dramatic shifts in the demographic workforce.
So if you look on the next page on 73, this is also census data, but rather than by industry, so the way they break things down within industry is by what they call occupation. And the occupation really defines the nature of the work as opposed to, do I work for a company that is a health services company? Well, what is my job? Am I sales? Am I a custodian? Am I an analyst? And so occupation is that way of breaking down the jobs for residents.
All right, let's keep going. Top two industries employ 40%. Okay, that's the other thing to note. 40% are in those top two. All right, keep going. Most residents live.
We looked at the distribution of where residents live and work. And the percentage of people who live and work in Montgomery County increased slightly from 58% to 61%. And we benchmarked this versus other counties in the region, and it really demonstrates we're overall, you know, we're not just a bedroom community. We are really a robust residential and employment center. The percentage of people who live and work in DC is, you know, slightly higher. And interestingly, that declined, you know, a couple of percentage points. So more people are living in DC and commuting to other places. You know, Frederick County is sort of the nearest peer of people living and working in Frederick County. But the other major suburban counties, including Fairfax County, the percentage of residents who both live and work in the county is lower.
Has this changed? I'd love to see this in the last 10 years or in the last 5 years. I would imagine that it might look different for us. You know, I'm curious. I don't know, whoever looked at the data, do you know, just anecdotally, have our trend lines, have they continued to go up, you know, the 58 to 61%?
No,
or
it's been very stable, actually.
Okay.
In the last, like you're saying, 5 to 10, absolutely not really changed. In 20, it may have changed, like, just a little bit. But
Yeah,
we'd have to go back way far for it to be bedroom community, again, where everybody lived here.
Well, I'm just wondering if there's a corresponding, you know, as the cost of housing has continued to rise, do we see, because you always hear, for example, you know, all of our workforce is living in Frederick County or living in Howard County because they can't afford to live here. So I'm just wondering if that's bearing out in the data at all.
At a countywide level, probably not, but if you look at individual areas of the county,
Probably
you can see that better. But at the countywide level, we're such a big county that the numbers all aggregated together, you might not see that yet. But we can definitely look at certain locations, like, if it's people living up north in Clarksburg versus people living, southeast or southwest, those may look quite different than the countywide number.
I saw a COG analysis of the same general idea, but it included commuter flows back between each jurisdiction, showed what was the net number of people moving between and among the different DC jurisdictions. And it showed that there's about a 5,000, this is a few years ago, about 5,000 more people going from Montgomery to Fairfax every morning than Fairfax to Montgomery. But it's not as disproportionate as a lot of people would lead you to believe. I hear people say all the time, oh, all the jobs are over in Virginia. We're hemorrhaging economic opportunities. The only way anybody can earn livelihood is to go over the bridge in the morning. I don't think that's true, and this data reinforces that. This is what I would take away from this, is that we actually have the highest proportion of residents who live and work in our jurisdiction of any jurisdiction in DC, in the DC region, except for DC proper. So a lot of people, even in Fairfax, are commuting to Arlington because of the Pentagon. And that goes back to your point about earlier about defense spending and the different government sectors that are responsible for the employment base.
But the job numbers in the last 2 years are very different. And I don't know that that's going to be in this trends report, but Mr. Chairman, you've got to focus on that new set of data that shows 90% of all job growth in 2018 was in Northern Virginia. 93%.
Yeah, and this is back to my sort of half empty, half full idea that I
Yeah.
keep trying to come back to, which is not to deny that we have serious issues with economic competitiveness, but also let's put it all in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even trying, I'm just trying to get the fact out there, let alone why you think it happened or what. I think it's related to many factors, but if it's a trend, if 90% of new jobs in the region are going to get created in Northern Virginia, if that is a trend that continues, it's not just an aberration, but if 10 years from now, it still has been the case that every year 90% of the new jobs are now getting created in Northern Virginia, that's going to have massive repercussions in this region.
Yes, agreed.
So I don't know, I'm just hoping that it's somehow a consequence of something that we don't quite know, but that might shift, but there's no real reason to think differently, that it's with Amazon growth there, and I just think all that momentum that Northern Virginia built for years and years and years, finally it just kind of broke through, and it got to the point where companies are like, if we're going to grow here, you're just going to grow in Northern Virginia. If you're going to locate here, you're just going to locate in Northern Virginia. And to me, that feels like that's what has happened. And so we used to be, it was sort of, the chips would just fall and they would scatter across the region. And now they're all getting loaded into Fairfax and Alexandria and Arlington.
I agree wholeheartedly with that, but I guess where I think it's not so much that I differ, but I think an additional dimension of this to think about is the fact that while it's true that Northern Virginia has a lot of positive momentum and jobs growth, it's also true that we have tremendous assets in terms of employment right here and in the Bay Arenda.
In the game, right? We can get our own momentum and we can grow our own job base too. I totally agree. But I think, we have to recognize that the recent data is alarming.
Yeah, we definitely need to take better advantage of the assets that we have in Montgomery County and in the region, not just in Northern Virginia, but the region more broadly. It's Fort Meade and Fort Detrick and University of Maryland and all the other things.
5,000 number disparity that you mentioned, if there's 5,000 more people commuting from Montgomery to to Fairfax, if in 4 years that number is suddenly 10,000, 15,000, that's going to have massive consequences on the bridge and on 270 and everything, There's no other way to get there, by the way. You
can't, transit doesn't, it's not that viable. Metro doesn't really serve that corridor that well. Andrew?
Yeah, I think just to both of your points, I mean, having world-class assets or noble intentions, it's not good enough. I mean, we have to utilize them in a way that actually attracts new businesses, new residents, and is competitive. I think the other challenge, what you talked about, when we're losing folks who are living here and working somewhere else, sometimes it's to Frederick, sometimes it's to Howard and to Prince George's, but a lot of times it's to jurisdictions that are outside of Maryland. And so we're losing it on both ends. Whereas in Virginia, there's a lot of Fairfax to Arlington. You know, there's more, intrastate mobility and to a certain extent, at least anecdotally. Question on the data here. Who's included in this? Is this adult aged? How does this reflect retirees? How does this reflect students?
Sure. So this is self-reported data from the census on residents who are employed. So they could be part-time, they could be full-time, they could be self-employed, but this is their self-reported commute. Does that clarify?
Employed in Montgomery County.
Yeah, anybody who lives here. They're a resident of Montgomery County and they're employed.
But this is live and work in Montgomery County.
So she's showing you who lives here and works here, but the data was taken from a data set of anybody who's employed
The question
and a resident.
Yeah, the survey is sent to residents, and there's a question of where do you work.
So if you imagine like a
Starts with residence, though, not with employment.
Right,
Exactly.
Starts with the residency. You live here. Okay, where do you work?
Here's the resident universe, and then out of that resident universe, who also lives.
So these are adults because they filled out the census.
Yeah, I mean,
And it
most
includes
likely.
retirees.
Working age is between, approximately 16 and 65, but they could be below that. Technically, it's probably not very many 16 to 18-year-olds, and it's probably not a whole
Yeah,
lot.
but is a 16 to 18-year-old filling out a census?
They could. It's self-reported if they're in the household. They could.
Probably not. So
Probably
mostly,
not, but-
households who fill out the American Community Survey, or in 1990 it was the long form of the census, and it's self-reported, saying where do you work. And usually I think the question is, and Pamela can chime in here as our census expert. There's sort of each household member, where do you live, where do you work.
It's true. Typically, one person in the household will fill out the form. They may reference the other adult in the household to say, okay, what's our combined income or whatever. But it's not like you're right. It's not like a 14-year-old is filling out their section of the form.
This next data point is interesting. It's small as a percentage of the overall population, but the question of where people working at home, we include in this presentation because it's sort of a trending item, and I think the numbers are interesting. The percentage of people who work at home in Montgomery County increased from 3.8% to 6.2%. We're kind of in the middle regionally of that trend. As we think long-term about the general plan, it's an interesting question of what if that doubles in the next, or triples in the next 30 years. And one just limitation of this survey instrument and how the question's asked is that in reality what we're seeing today is that people work at home a couple days, work in the office a couple days, work on site at their client a couple days. And unfortunately this doesn't, report that level of nuance. It's self-reported data of do you work at home? Exactly.
I don't know that there's a meaningful difference here, but ours is the slowest growth rate there. Almost everyone else's is doubled or more than doubled, whereas ours is less than doubled. But I don't know what that means. Okay?
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's like higher in some of the outerline counties. Like Loudoun County has the highest percentage of people who work from home.
All right. Is this work at home at all or work at home sometimes?
I think it's just, do you work at home? So I assume primarily work at home, yeah. We looked at the commuting data from the census. Again, it's an area there's been some small changes. The percentage.
Can you just go back?
Yeah.
This is interesting because you'll often hear people say that the county's strength is these consultancies, and just got to say that the growth, our relative growth compared to other jurisdictions in the region is not as great. And if these consultancies that operate out of the House were our comparative advantage, which some people say that they are, I don't know that would be, that number would be what it is. So
Yeah, I don't know.
you may not hear people say
have
that, but
heard
I
that.
do. People, oh, well, we don't get the big companies. We get these high value, 4 or 5 person consulting teams.
Well, there's a way to look at that that wouldn't be this data probably. It would be like sole proprietorship data
Yeah.
to see where those are and like how much they're bringing in revenue wise. But yeah, that's pretty hard to tease out from this aggregated data.
All right. Different topic then. All right.
So yeah, commuting, driving, still primarily the main way people get to work, 65%, but it is down a little bit, 3 percentage points from 1990. 16% take public transit, which is up 3 percentage points from 1990. Commutes are on average 35 minutes, which is 6 minutes longer than in 1990.
Just on that one, we're gonna stop on every slide.
Yeah, no, I was prepared.
So this is pretty interesting in the fact that in a 30-year period, or almost more, what is it, 1990 to 2016, so almost 40 years. Or, no, 30 years. 25. Yeah, that's why almost 30. I got it almost right at the same time. Okay, thank you.
It's Monday morning, man.
Monday morning.
Depends on what almost means.
That's right. In 26 years, right? Almost 26. You've had relatively little change in the numbers of people who are driving and commuting, and that's dramatic. I mean, and when there's been a lot of incentives and efforts to try to get transit in the right direction, you got to look at that, and at the same time, the commutes have gone up. So anyway, we can draw whatever we want from that, but
Well, I think the point is that you're right. I mean, there's not like some magic wand that gets waved and then suddenly there's a massive shift in the population from driving to transit. It's gradual, it's slow and steady and gradual. And during a lot of that time, there was underinvestment in metro.
Sure.
But, it had peaks and valleys too. So, I think generally speaking, it's better than if the trends were the reverse. But, you don't get these. I mean, I guess the reason I'm saying this is because, like, the BRT talk that's been happening around the county is like, oh, yeah, we're going to build this countywide BRT system, and then suddenly it's going to be like this massive change.
Right.
It's always going to be incremental. It's always going to be, change is just going to be incremental. And so that period of time actually covers a lot of when Metro, like the Wheaton Metro, that would have opened in '96, I think, something like that, Glenmont. So there's been some expansion of Metro in that.
Well, there's been some expansion of transit, but there's also been expansion of highways. The ICC happened during that period, the Cross County Parkway in Fairfax County. There's been we're about to get the Purple Line, but maybe we'll also get a managed lanes project to increase capacity on 270 and 495. So it's not surprising that, you're
Also
seeing.
land use. I mean, right? It's like this is the era when a lot of Gaithersburg, Clarksburg, Germantown, a lot of those subdivisions were built, actually, right? Late 90s, mid 90s. I mean, more were built probably before the mid 90s, but still a lot of the residential construction that happened in this period of time was suburban subdivisions.
Yeah, and some of it comes back to jobs as well. If people are having to go elsewhere for work, that's going to increase their commute times. If they can work close to home, then that's going to help reduce the amount of traffic congestion.
Yeah. I mean, my point was just that it's gradual, and I think we need to approach it soberly and do what we can to make it more accessible and lower wait times and all the things we've discussed. But it's just when you hear a lot of people drive to work.
Well, now this number would look quite differently, I think, in DC. Like
Yeah,
the number
I would
of trips
assume.
in DC
Yeah, I would
that are
assume.
not driving now is off the charts, right? It's like more than half.
A majority of new residents in DC do not have a car
They don't even
at all.
So the urbanism model really works if you have the urbanism location to match it.
Right.
But
And plus, our county's so big, it's so diverse, depends on
right,
where you
only,
live.
only a small
Yeah,
share of it
yeah.
is that urbanism context.
Okay. It's also, I mean, this is a demographic data. If you break this down by demographics, it would be quite different. And the question is, who are the demographics you're looking to attract? And if you ask most businesses, they would say young workers. And so, we also have to think, I mean, I understand the points that have been made, but, if you're looking at, where are the trends headed and what are people looking to do and, what else, what are the new suburban subdivisions that we are going to build, the sprawl developments that we're going to build. The truth is there's not much. There ain't a lot left. And so the question is, what choices do we have? Who do we want to attract? Where do we want to focus those transportation investments today? Not, where have they been the last 26 to 40 years, depending on how you're doing your math. But
And that's the
quick,
Maryland story as well.
yeah, no, exactly. I mean, suburban office to, a downtown urban environment specifically, not because the CEO cares that it's in an urban environment, because the CEO wants to attract new top talent that he thinks will want to be on a metro line and on a light rail transit line. But on this, I mean, this is also self-reported too. So like the 6-minute commute, transportation data would not support that. This is self-reported.
No, it increased
Right.
by 6 minutes. So the commute's 35, and in 1990 it was 20.
But that's self-reported. Yeah, so the issue is if I'm reporting my commute, I report the commute on a good day. So somebody says, how far away do you live from your work? My commute's about 35 minutes on average. That doesn't include the 2.5 hours on the days where there's a bad accident. And so it's not this isn't
average, it
this
was
isn't
the
real.
same. It was an average before too, though. So I think it's safe to say that commutes probably have gone up.
No, but but the point that I'm making is this data point is showing like demographically where does somebody live in relation to where they work, not what is traffic doing. So this is saying how far away do you live from your work, not how easy is your commute to get there, because this isn't really reflecting the way that a normal person, and I could be wrong about this and you all are the experts, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe if I were filling out this census question, I would put on a normal day what I normally consider to be my average commute, because that is the way that when I purchased my house or when I decided where to rent, I made a decision based on a normal day in a normal environment, and that's the number that I use, not the, I'm not like breaking it down and saying, well, if I go Monday was a 27-minute. If I go Tuesday was a 41-minute.
But there is the census does ask for a reference week, as in what was your commute during the previous reference week. So it's not like, what have you done in the past year? What do you feel like your typical commute is? It's like, what happened to you in the past reference week is how it's posed.
Got it. And then the 16% that take public transit, is that take public transit every day to work?
It would be, again,
What's the
within your
question?
reference week.
But that's also, that's an important point also, and especially as it relates to bikes as well as transit. The question, I believe, is framed as what was the mode you used most often over the past week? So when I used to work in downtown DC, I'd ride my bike to work maybe a couple days a week, but that would get counted as, and the other days I take the train. So I'm counted as a Metro Rail rider, 0 bicycling, 0 car, 0 whatever else. So I think you'd probably find there's even more telecommuting going on than what some of the data shows, because some people are allowed to work at home like 1 day a week. And so that kind of tends to mask some important nuances in how people are changing their travel behavior.
Like everybody telecommutes 1 day a week, boom.
Yeah, if you ride your bike or take the
Massive
train or telecommute.
global impact, but it wouldn't be reflected in the data.
Yeah.
All right, so how far up, Tanya, you want to speak? How far are we in this presentation? Have we hit the 10%?
I think we're about halfway done.
Halfway, okay, good.
60% done.
All right.
So, yeah.
If we could probably get through this by 11, then we can turn to the final item.
Oh, yeah, that's no problem.
Sure, Tanya Stern, Deputy Director. Just had a quick comment related to what Councilmember Friedson talked about. When you look at this this data, this is telling what has happened over the past 25 years, but as we all know, there's been a lot of changes in the transportation sector. There's a lot more options that people have now to commute to work, to get around. And so I think this data will be really interesting to look at in the next 10 to 20 years to see the impact of, greater use of biking as commuting, even e-scooters if people want to use that, if that's a viable option, but also the fact that we have a number of plans and initiatives underway to encourage more multimodal transportation options, such as the bicycle master plan. We've got a lot more transit-oriented development. So I think this number, I don't know for certain, but my guess is this number will look somewhat different, in the next 25 years because of all those changes.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about at-place employment, and this data is about jobs in the county, agnostic of where the person lives who works in the job. Our main source of data for this analysis is the quarterly Census of Employment and Wages run by the Department of Labor. And just one limitation of that is it's based on filings to states for uninsurance compensation. Unemployment insurance, yeah. So unfortunately, it does not include people who are self-employed. So these numbers are a little bit lower, some other projections that you see, but they provide a good industry breakdown, which is why, it's a standard go-to source for people in our industry. So in this metric, the distribution of employment, similar with resident employment, it hasn't shifted much over the past 25 years. Of the jobs in the county, 81% are private sector, but again, that includes government contracting, 10% federal government, and 9% local government. And again, the largest sector is professional, scientific, and technical services with 65,000 employees.
That 65,000, the number has remained the same, or the share has remained?
No, it's the share, and you'll note that this is a different industry breakdown. It's not census data, so it does not include your waste management and administrative services. This is just purely professional, scientific, and technical.
Great. So that's growing.
And that's 460,000 jobs, so extra zero in the title.
So jobs increased by 21% in this 26-year period. Go back to the introduction, I think it said that the population increased by 38%.
Correct.
So that, to the
And
point,
workforce
that's a
increased by
problem.
31%.
That's a huge issue.
Yeah,
That's a huge problem.
It's hard to tell what the right number should be. As we saw from the commuting patterns, a lot of people are working in the county. This data doesn't report people who are self-employed. And looking at some other data, we've seen that has grown, increased a lot. We spend a lot of time, as Corinne can attest to, about trying to make connections between these numbers and what the right formula should be. And it's just challenging given the dynamics of the employment markets related to workforce, how long people are employed, whether they're working part-time or full-time, and the overall population growth. But as we also put in the report, during the same time, Fairfax, the employment grew by 60%, driven by defense spending and intelligence agency spending. So we lag that competitor. But as Commissioner Anderson said, you have to look at what we have as a base in terms of the existing federal agencies, high quality of life, existing assets of the county, and figure out, what performance makes sense for us.
We've got great assets. We've got great advantages. We ought to be able to build on that and succeed. No question about it. We also just need to recognize the context that we're in.
Yeah, exactly.
But assets are just opportunities.
Right.
They don't mean anything unless you actually utilize them in a way that creates jobs, that supports quality of life, that improves wages, that does all the things that need to be done. It doesn't mean, it means that it's possible, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's happening. So I think that's
It's not happening on its own.
Right,
Once
exactly.
it did, but
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we have here? Employment forecast has declined over time.
Yeah. So these graphs show the forecast put out by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments that we support in developing. And it's the forecasts over time. So, for example, the round 5.1, which is the sort of gray line, that forecast was completed in 1994. The most recent forecast, which is the dotted line, round 9.1, was completed about 2 years ago. And it just shows over time the amount of jobs the region was projecting would go in the county has declined as the overall regional forecast, has really flattened out. And so from the planning perspective, that's interesting for us because looking at the jobs projected when they were doing the general plan update in 1993 and even in the 60s, employment was growing much more rapidly. You know, they were expecting employment to grow much more rapidly. And since then, it's really flattened out.
Is that federal flattening, or is that federal and private combined?
It's everything. Yeah. So, you know, in the, you know, for example, even the forecast in the red line 6.4a, that forecast was conducted in 2004. You know, they thought by, you know, 2020 there'd be nearly 650,000 jobs. But our 9.1 forecast, you know, is projecting a little bit over 550,000 jobs.
That's
Yeah.
county forecasts, or this is
It's the county forecast that's conducted in conjunction with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments forecast. And it's really, I call it a top-down and bottom-up forecast. You know, there's a regional econometric model that looks at overall jobs numbers for the regions and shares by county. And then we do an extensive bottom-up analysis by TAZ, you know, looking at the development pipeline, what's planned, economic conditions on the ground to think about, you know, are those numbers reasonable, and then where does that growth go?
less than 10 years ago. We missed the mark for 10 years later by 100,000 jobs. Is that what you just said?
No, I wouldn't say that we missed the mark. It's about expectations have been tempered.
Well, our forecast, our forecast was off by 100,000 jobs.
Forecast
No?
is never off. No, I'm joking.
Right, it's reality that's off.
Yeah, exactly.
The reality missed the forecast.
Perfect. Yeah. So these are based on, present condition and past trends, right? And then as conditions develop over time, you adjust the forecast to reflect that. So what happens is that line is getting lower and lower and lower because that's what conditions were. That's how conditions were changing every time the forecast was
Steepness of the
updated.
curve, is that kind of what we should be looking at? Is like how it's sort of leveling out?
Not just that, but how there's one up here and then you go down. That's growth that is less over time.
I mean, at the moment, you're forecasting 2045, we won't even hit what we were previously forecasting for 2080.
Right, because the conditions now don't warrant it, but back in 1994, apparently they did. Now,
That could change.
That could change again.
I mean, Amazon.
Next time, yeah,
Amazon brings a tech economy to the region. Suddenly, there's a whole logic separate from government.
so don't think that just because
The internet.
recently, right, just because recently we've been going like this doesn't mean that over the next few forecast rounds we'll go like this. It just depends.
Absolutely.
It's based on current conditions.
Go ahead. You can just keep your mics on.
Yeah, so this seems to demonstrate that we go too high with the highs and too low with the low, right? Like, if when times are really good, I mean, we do this all the time with projections. We face this with the CIP, right? That, we looked at what has happened recently. We said, okay, we're going to continue to go gangbusters for the next 3 years, which was not based on reality. It was based on what the best case scenario could have been, but never likely was. And it seems like we do that here too with the projections that, when we were in a steep curve, we just said, oh, we're going to keep, riding this trajectory for the foreseen future. And obviously that's not how it works. It's fairly cyclical. There's a long-term trend perhaps that goes up, but the steepness of the curve is not at its steepest point. It's probably somewhere.
Right, and we're not going to
middle.
attempt to forecast those business cycles or something like, the 2008 recession, the lingering impacts, or the BRAC closures and the lingering. We don't even worry about that. We look for the long haul trend. And so the only anecdote to what you're saying, this sort of overshooting and undershooting based on where you are at the time, is to look at an even longer trend. So is to zoom out, basically. But the closer we zoom in, the more our curve is just going to be up and down like this every time we do it.
All right.
All right, so we are finished with employment. Now we have a few slides on demographic and housing data points based on.
Before you move on from employment, so this review does not include the last couple of years.
Right.
But I just want to put this into the conversation because we've talked about it. The last 2 years, the job number has been very different. And Carrie, I asked if you thought that data was, reasonably good, and you thought it was. And so it will be a little hard for me to quote off the top of my head, but I think the region created we think 27,000 jobs in 2018, and only like 2,500 of them were in Montgomery County.
It's been flat, yeah.
So 90% of more than 90% of the new job growth has been in Northern Virginia, which is a bigger region, no question. It's Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, Prince William, Loudoun. I mean, it's much bigger than, but nevertheless, that there's still major consequences from that, and that it was not the historical trend. The historical trend that Montgomery County is built upon is we're getting a good share of the jobs that are created in the region, and the latest number is we're not. The 2019 number is actually showing fewer jobs in Montgomery County over the course of the year. We're losing jobs. Hopefully that'll come out in the updates or whatever. But, as in, that won't be the ultimate conclusion of the data. But, you're looking at a 30-year trend here showing steady job growth over time, even if it's being revised, less favorably. But what happens to Montgomery County if that suddenly is no longer the case, if there is not steady job growth? Again, I don't want to overemphasize just 2 years of data or a year and a half of data, but you can't look at that and think anything other than that is scary.
And we can do different forecasts too. We can provide you with a very pessimistic forecast if that's something you want to be able to see.
No, I want the best guess.
We can do. I mean, we can build in a lot of different.
Well, let me ask you this: how would you do a forecast now, based on the last year and a half, 2 years of data?
I mean, so the last 2 years of data isn't going to impact it that much because it's also built on land use conditions and what we've master planned and what's in the pipeline and then what our capacity is in the long term.
But I don't know what I think of that, right? Okay, so we've zoned a lot of commercial property. Clarksburg has a lot of planned commercial office towers. Guess what? It's gonna be a long time before the market wants to go there for that.
Yes.
So.
And the market-based forecasts are always going to be shorter term. They're not going to be those 30. I mean, nobody knows what the market's going to do in 30 years. But market-based forecasts in the next 5 years are much more reliable than our long-term forecast. Ours is really a land use tool because we're the planning department.
Part of the problem, I think, is that there are factors that happen at a national or global level that affect the work. The most important might be over the next generation, automation. And that will occur no matter what we do in Montgomery County or in the DC region. There will be other factors that influence what our competitive position is relative to other jurisdictions in the DC region or other parts of the country, but that may well be overwhelmed by other trends that have nothing to do with whether or not Fairfax or DC or Charlotte, North Carolina, or Pittsburgh or some other jurisdiction that we think of as being potentially a competitor is successful at doing or less successful at doing.
Okay.
I think if you looked at land use generations past might drive economic development to the extent that you allow commercial development to happen in Germantown, then boom, offices start popping up. But in the future, I think it's going to be more about the Purple Line corridor, more transit focus. That's where all the growth is happening now. It's where it's been happening for a while. And how does that factor into projections if we've already looked at land use there?
Yeah, so when there's a major transportation project like that, absolutely growth gets reallocated. We know that jobs follow those spines and those nodes where there's connections between transit. We know that that's true, for hundreds of years back. So that absolutely does influence the forecast. It's not just where's the zoning.
Casey, you mentioned a COG analysis of flow from Northern Virginia to Montgomery County and such. Have you seen the similar numbers in and out of DC to Montgomery County? Because I think sometimes when we talk about, the report that the chair mentioned about 90% of the growth being in Northern Virginia, there's obviously a lot of growth in DC region. I was just with some council members from DC who lament how many people are coming, and living here or coming to community college here, or and so I think there's a different story between DC and Montgomery County that might potentially benefit us in some ways. I would just wondered if you.
Yeah, I don't remember what COG said about DC versus the commuting patterns with DC, but I think that's an important point that as crime has become less of a perceived and real issue in DC, And also, I think the opportunity to send your kids to charter schools has led a lot of people to conclude that they can, instead of moving to the suburbs when their kids reach a certain point in school or school age, Gwen Wright is a great example. Her kids went to Washington Latin in D.C., and she's lived in Cleveland Park. She didn't feel the need to move out of the city, and that's great. That's very healthy. There's been sort of a renaissance of cities, and certainly since 1994, when D.C. had the highest murder rate in the entire country, we're all, that benefits the whole region, the fact that D.C. is healthy, and it has a lot of positive trends. But it means that we can't count on our competitive advantage just being, oh, we have better schools, and, when people's kids get to a certain age, they're going to want what their parents and grandparents wanted, which is live in a single-family detached house at the end of a cul-de-sac and drive to work every day. We have to be able to compete against the things that the city has always offered, because some of the relative difference between what we offer in terms of schools or public safety or other factors is no longer as substantial. That gap has narrowed in certain ways. On the other hand, because we are an adjacent jurisdiction, we can benefit a lot from the good things that are happening in D.C., like the redevelopment of Walter Reed, for example. If they have new embassy presence, some federal government presence there.
Job growth could help us.
Yeah, exactly. And like the Upper Georgia Avenue corridor can be beneficial to us in a way that in the past it wouldn't necessarily, certainly since the riots, that Upper Shepherd Park, Upper Georgia Avenue corridor has not been a place that's been a center of economic vitality in D.C. or necessarily helping to spur development or growth in Montgomery County. So I think that, we're kind of in some of this discussion of competition overlooks some of the ways in which we have this mutually beneficial
That was my point. I think
relationship.
particularly with D.C. and Prince George's County, there's a regional approach here that I think could be mutually beneficial in the short term. Obviously, year to year, they if you get jobs, it benefits your bottom line, you get the tax base. But I do think there's some synergistic opportunities that could even be discussed or planned, or I think working together. That's a great point about that Georgia Avenue corridor, because like you said, typically it had looked pretty similar for a long time, and now it's starting to change.
And one of the things that we discussed with Marriott when they were looking at a new headquarters location, they did a study of their own employees, and they had very precise data. They know exactly where their people are, and they found they had a lot of younger employees who live in the district, want to continue to live in the district, and want to be able to get to work wherever that is without having to drive or make 3 different bus connections. And that was important to them. And so it's not necessarily that we want everybody to move to Montgomery County, but we'd like to be attractive to those kind of employees that want to be in an urban place, to feel like, getting a job out in the county is not like some sort of, hardship duty. That it's something that they.
One of the things that surprised me about this latest data I've been talking about, though, was that D.C. was also getting a small share. That was really shocking to me. Is that when I said 9% of the growth was in Northern Virginia, D.C. and Maryland are splitting that remaining 9%. That was really unexpected. It was actually like 92% or something like that. So I don't know what to make of that. I mean, D.C. is experiencing such a renaissance. It would seem like a very attractive place for an employer to locate, but nevertheless, it was not getting the benefit of all that growth. It gets the residential side benefit, but the job growth was not that great.
I think with Fairfax, you also have to recognize the investment they made in the Silver Line, and that was planned for years. It took them a long time to build it, and now it's open, and they, did all the zoning to support all that growth. So it's really been like our Purple Line on I think, much larger scale, a major infrastructure investment that they're now realizing, and that's also kind of driving a lot of the growth and employment.
Well, there you go. So they are using the Silver Line to drive their growth and employment. And that's what I've been saying we need to do about the Purple Line. We need to use the Purple Line to drive our growth and employment. Unfortunately, there's a lot of conversation about the Purple Line as it's just a threat. The Purple Line is bad, essentially. It's going to cause all kinds of negative consequences. We can mitigate against negative consequences, but fundamentally we need to look at it as an opportunity to grow our economic base. Okay. Did you have anything?
Yeah, well, I think your points about competitiveness are really important. I would add early childhood to that as well. I mean, that was a significant shift. I think there's also, I mean, there's local issues here. I mean, we've rested on our laurels for a long time that we're the shining city on a hill in the region where every family would want to move and every business would want to locate. That is not the sure bet that it historically has been, and we have to step up our game like everybody else has stepped up theirs and just recognize that we are in a much more regionally competitive environment than we've ever been in, and we're not necessarily used to that. We're not necessarily comfortable with that, but we need to get comfortable with it. We need to get comfortable with it real fast because it's moving, and if we don't hop on, we're going to be left behind. And I think that's where some of the data in recent years is catching up. But there also, I mean, there are, to your point as well, there are global trends here as well. Household creation is starting much later. We used to capture the young couple much earlier on in their life cycle. When they would want to move to a suburban environment, when they were starting to have kids. They're having kids later. They're getting more comfortable in the neighborhoods where they're living. They're getting more comfortable, more used to an urban environment. There's a movement to urban environments. So there's a larger point of that's why the transportation is so important. That's why the land use decisions are important. But I also think it's important to recognize to the point that Chair Reamer was making, we can zone whatever we want. Land use plans are really, and master plans are really market takers, not market makers. And, the goal of land use should be to create an environment that can absorb what the market is going to do so that we are prepared to take advantage of and be providing the type of living environments, working environments, lifestyle that folks would want. But if there isn't a market for what we would like, then all the master plan is just a plan that never gets realized. The key is finding that balance. And so that's where it's a little bit concerning. While I understand it's the planning department and you're in the business of master plans, and that is really the main purpose, I think we need to be careful of that too, because master plans are about aspirations and hopes, and hope is not a strategy. And so we need to make sure that we're balancing where the actual market is and helping to make sure that the market is in a place that can absorb what we would like, and that we have master plans that are doing that. I mean, Germantown, for example, Germantown didn't just happen because we said that there could be office buildings along the 270 corridor. There were people who wanted to be in suburban office. I mean, there was a marketplace for that. There were investments that were made outside of the master plans. And so, there was a transportation network with 270 that was there, and now that is shifting to more urban environments. And so we have to adjust that accordingly, and we have to make sure that we're addressing and projecting data, I think, that is reflective of where the actual marketplace is, not necessarily just what we hope the market would be.
And that's why we're building more parks in Bethesda.
Exactly. Thank you for that.
I knew that was your point.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Hopefully we can power through this.
Yeah. So we did a little bit of benchmarking data. County Stat has done a robust benchmarking analysis, so we included a sample related to the indicators, demographic indicators we'd included in our trends report because you're interested, but it's a worthy conversation of having County Stat come in, talk about all the benchmarking they've done, or we can come back with them. So we selected this set of 7 peer jurisdictions, mostly major counties outside of major cities. DC, Bergen, New Jersey, Fairfield, Connecticut, Westchester, New York, Fairfax, and Middlesex County, Massachusetts, which is the northern suburbs of Boston. And on all these metrics, we really rank highly. We're the 3rd largest county. We have the 2nd largest percentage people of color, the 2nd largest percentage foreign born, next to Fairfax, slightly lower, the 2nd highest percentage of advanced degrees. And then we included commuting by public transit, and we're actually 4th on that scale. And then we're 2nd in median household income. And I thought the spreads in median household income were kind of interesting. Where Fairfax, they have $118,000 a year. We're at $103,000. But then there's a drop off to Middlesex, which is at $98,000, and the rest go down from there. So overall, if you look, we focused also on the Northeast because of the interrelationship in the economies in the Northeast corridor. We're really performing quite highly.
And this is 2016 data, right? Because
Correct.
I just saw something.
Uh,
Our median income was now 117 or something.
Yeah, this is 2017 American Community Survey. So this is 1 year.
Just one also note, the transit share in Westchester, it jumps out at me there, 23%. I guess that's all the New York community.
Metro North, yeah. Yep.
It's pretty
Yeah.
impressive. It shows that a suburban community could get numbers up a lot.
Yeah.
With that kind of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And then there had also been a question about education levels of foreign-born adults. And so this graph breaks out the 2016 American Community Survey data. Our foreign-born population overall is quite highly educated. 48% have at least a BA, 26% have an advanced degree, compared to 21% in the region and 13% in the U.S. overall. And so, it reflects our population overall, of the foreign-born population. Once to this slide again, the distribution of household types. There had been a question about the national average household size. Our number is slightly higher than the national average. Currently, we have 2.77 in 2016 compared to 2.65 nationally.
Could you go back to the last slide just for 1 second? I just want to make one point and make a data and see if you can break this out. I've always known this to be true, that we have a highly educated foreign-born population. But I'd be curious if you could overlay, one of the things I've consistently heard and seen is that some of them have trouble getting a job in their field and have to go under their level of education because of either requirements that are here or, discrimination, a whole bunch of factors. Could you overlay the census data of these foreign-born, highly educated folks in the fields, in what fields they're in? Is that something that we could tease out?
I believe at the county level, we can go to a different data set to take a look at that, where we can actually have more custom tables to look at the occupations and foreign-born. And that's something that we could take a look at. It's not a standard table necessarily,
Sure, yeah,
but I will double check that to make sure.
I'd love to follow up on that just because I think I know that there are barriers and issues in that area that are holding back us from even filling open jobs that we have in some cases, so.
Might not be getting the benefit of all that education if people don't have jobs that allow them to use it.
And then to wrap up, just a couple housing slides. Councilmember Friedson had a question about housing unit sizes. So we broke out the distribution of bedrooms by household type and looked at the change over time. So the graph on the left is owner-occupied households, number of bedrooms. The graph on the right is renter-occupied households. And so on the owner side, you're basically seeing a slight increase in larger houses. The greatest growth was in the 5+ bedrooms from 12% to 17%, and a decline of households living in units with just 3 bedrooms from 38% to 34.9%. But on the renter side, the shift goes the other way, and there's an increase in households living in units with fewer bedrooms, growth in studios, 0 bedrooms, and even a decline in the number of bedrooms with households with 3+ bedrooms. And then this data is backed up. We looked at a couple other sources. Looking at the size of units, and so basically the size of single-family housing units built over time has increased. So this graph breaks out the average size of units by the decade in which they were built. So you can see we've increased from, in the 50s, it was about 1,500 square feet, where today we're at 3,700 square feet.
Tiny house movement notwithstanding.
Yeah. And then looking at the actual sizes of another source, looking at rental units, again, it shows a decline. This shows rental unit by year built. and units that were built more recently tend to have fewer bedrooms. So it's an increase in one bedrooms. That was 55% in units built between 2010 and 2016 compared to units built in the 60s and 50s that had, were more likely to have 2 bedrooms or more. So again, that just shows that shift another way.
One of the things that I read in your report is just the income stagnation and how the wages have, this is nationally obviously, but we're not immune to wage growth not rising.
Yep.
And that when you see these last 2 slides, your houses are getting bigger for some, and then apartments are getting smaller, and it's just putting all that together, there's a lot of strain on people.
Yep, exactly. And then Councilmember Reamer had asked for rents by sub-area. And so these numbers are not adjusted for inflation, but you really see the same trend of rents have grown overall by 62% in the county. The greatest growth, it's been in metro accessible areas. Bethesda's grown by 58%, Silver Spring by 44%, North Bethesda by 74%. A lot of that's sort of a market that's been made the past decade. And still significant, but slower growth in Germantown, 37%, only 46%.
Okay.
All right, last slide. So just, implications as we've thought about the general plan update, the increasing diversity in the county that we talked a lot about last time, increasing the percent people of color, foreign born, that the demographics of the county are quite different than they were in the 1990s, the last time the plan was looked at, and increasing diversity in housing types. Aging demographics is a really major theme, growing senior population, both what that's going to mean for the services required, housing required, and then also the economy. How are employers replacing those workers who are retiring? Like, how do we have a workforce that supports that? And related to what kind of environments are those workers going to want to work in, and how can we grow those environments? Again, this point about incomes not keeping up with costs, and that creates a lot of pressure on family finances. We talked a lot about the employment. I'd say it's stable, but there are significant challenges, as Councilmember Reamer alluded to. And overall, we're really thinking about a county that the land use pattern has shifted from development to redevelopment, which is more complicated, more expensive. And so you have to think about, how do we plan for infill? And it's a different mindset than planning certainly in the 60s and even in the 80s and 90s.
They had the easy job. There's just a bunch of space and just put things.
Yeah, and we're happy to answer any additional questions.
Okay.
10 o'clock on
Asked
the
as
dot.
many as we can muster, so thank you for your work, and we'll keep in touch about it.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for the follow-up information as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, team. Casey? Now we will move on to the final item for today, which is a discussion about economic development strategy and implementation, focusing on some pieces of government organization. This might not be a terribly long conversation, but check in on some things. Good morning, Mr. Fletcher. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Still good morning indeed for a while. Thank you for joining us all through the morning. Okay, so, Gene, can you catch us up here?
Sure. As the report notes, during the June 25th discussion at the council, Ms. Navarro invited the county executive to come share his economic development strategy and implementation. In that memo, she provided a one-page summary of functions that are performed by the county. Staff notes that that's our list for the county. There's no right or wrong answer for that list. It was filled out by the previous administration to help understand who does what, especially during the privatization efforts of the Department of Economic Development.
Okay, wait, hang on. So the Circle 3, you're saying that was the list that the previous executive branch prepared?
Correct.
Okay, I was wondering about that. All right. And then circles 4 and 5 are this executive branch's status or?
Correct, their stab at where they're at and what they are looking at. And as the report notes, that list was updated, but not discussed during the June 25th work session. So the Fed committee requested an update from the executive branch. They're here today, and also noted it's still a work in progress. And as you just said, we can have as much or as little conversation as possible, but there's no proposal in front of the Fed committee or in front of the council right now for any specific reorganization. This is going to be an open discussion. And so council staff lists three categories or topics to discuss more specifically if the Fed committee is interested. But again, today's pretty open conversation to see where the executive branch is going with economic development strategy, as well as just what's inside the county government and what functions we're performing.
Okay, why don't we talk about the second two bullets first? Budget review and communication process. Can you explain a little bit more, Gene, what you thought we ought to
Sure.
keep in mind there?
Well, it's important for the communication process. It's important for the council to understand how that works, considering that there's not just one entity that does economic development per se in the county. I think we all think of Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation as our lead economic development organization, but clearly, as the chart shows on Circle 3, 4, and 5, that the county does a lot of economic development functions through a lot of different entities. And so understanding how the executive or the second floor and the administrative staff will get everyone in line, communicate the various functions that are going on so that our private partners, MCDC and WorkSource, are also in line with us is important. So that was what the second bullet is about in terms of communication process, just being able to understand how they're going to do that effectively. And then the third bullet is about the budget review. Again, there are a lot of different departments, offices, and organizations that the council reviews. The Fed committee does not review all of them. The staff is not suggesting or recommending that they should, but again, having an overall view of how all they use this cliche, how all the horses are pulling the cart together is important. And so maybe in future budget reviews, we could have one option could be an economic development day, where we understand where those things are going and how they're doing, but not an actual specific budget review that needs to be approved by the Fed committee. So those are those 2 points that you requested, Mark.
Because, for example, on page 3, circle 3, the finance, that's GEO, I think. EDC is Fed. Regional business hubs, what committee is that?
That'd be
Fed?
GEO as well.
That's GEO as well.
Under the community engagement cluster.
Under the community. So is that where that solutions group is moved under the community engagement cluster? Mm-hmm. And it was somewhere else in the executive's office, perhaps?
I believe it was in the county executive's office.
And then procurement. Interesting.
I get it coming and going.
I mean, I think it would be helpful to review everything together, and I kind of feel like economic development is the jurisdiction of the Economic Development Committee, and why create a joint committee? Because the bureaucracy has changed. But I think that's a topic for another time. Well, I guess we're sort of implicitly talking about it here. Okay. Well, Jerome, what would you like to share? Anything you wanted to, and could you please also touch on the Economic Development Strategic Plan and what that process, what's underway and what's the timing on that as well?
Okay, absolutely. So from the standpoint of the chart, as we state in the very first 3 boxes, we talk about what economic development looks like from an EDC standpoint. And the executive and the administration has said that they wanted to more define the role that they do so that we could make sure that we were all on the same page as to which functions they were doing extremely well and which functions the county needed to have more of a hand in. And that has been a lot of the conversation we've had with them over the last few weeks. As you know, they're going through a transition in leadership, and we're also participating in the selection of the candidate, and those interviews will happen later in August. Hopefully by early September, we'll be able to present a candidate that will then go through the council process and I wouldn't say confirmation, but making sure that you're aware of the actual candidate that is selected by the board of directors.
Yeah, I mean, I think the council wants to support wants to have a candidate that we support.
Absolutely.
So what does so now we're on circle 4. So in progress, what does that mean?
So in progress means they're doing that right now. You know, those aren't duties that we need to worry about who's doing it and where it's at.
In progress means
It's happening.
it's functioning.
Right, and a lot of what gets lost is, you know, our friends at the planning committee, you know, they're part of what I would say, we're either looking back or we're looking forward. We're not looking at the now. And now is what this chart should be reflecting of, is who's doing these duties right now. The duties are being done, even though they're being done in ways that aren't centralized, the work is still happening. And that needs, that's an important thing that we need to say. But our goal and our objective is to create a strategy that will allow all the pieces to be better aligned and have a better effectiveness overall. And if I will say that if it were easy, then someone else would have already done it. And the reason why it hasn't been done right now is because once you try to figure out one piece, then that kind of loosens up another piece. And then once you figure out a different piece, whether it's related to budget or communications, it tricks up something else. So we're trying to make sure, and then you can even throw in the fact that, you know, we have new leadership roles that are being filled at this exact same time as well. So changing something while those new leadership people are arriving here is not necessarily the best thing to do either. So the small business technical assistant and the entrepreneurship development, the incubator management, small business support, these are duties that we feel the county directly should own. You know, if we want to charge EDC with marketing, promotion, expansion, and retention, then the county has to do better with the small business and entrepreneurship that we provide to the county. The Business Solutions Group is one piece. There's also a piece that we have in libraries. We talk about incubators. That piece is located in finance under Ruth Simple. And we all know that there is a scope of work that's being developed for the incubator management position, management climate that we're trying to actually study for Montgomery County. There are different opinions about what the incubator climate should look like. The first thing to do is assess where we are with what we're doing. Should we be the ones actually running those incubators or not? And what does it take and what does it look like to get the programs that we want here in Montgomery County from an incubator standpoint?
Okay. Both my colleagues want to speak. I want to say something first. Mr. Friedson first, followed by Mr. Tuando. If by consolidation candidate you mean consolidating it into the EDC, I think that could be a good idea. I would really oppose taking back into government the entrepreneurship and the incubation. That we tried that for 25 years, and it just.
But when you say take it back, it never went anywhere.
Well,
Within the county.
it has, right. We wanted to give it to the EDC.
Correct.
Many of us did. I don't know that we ever 100% resolved that, but we also thought, while we're standing up the EDC, let's not burden them with this specific job. Let's get them running before we hand them that baton. And so we shifted some of that over to BHI, and as you know the story there.
Right, and so true. In an ideal world, and I feel like here we are saying ideal world again, you know, we would have stood up EDC and they would have gotten all the functions and the resources to accomplish everything that's on this list. But based on what has been accomplished, you know, they were a startup, so they had to get off the ground. They had to hire people and get things going in the right direction. And I believe they would say they're probably just ending their first full year of actually operating in a manner that was probably in its the way it was designed in the very beginning. But the incubator management piece of it, since we're touching on that, is still being managed by county staff.
It is, correct.
Yes, it is.
Which is, you know, for example, why the Silver Spring incubator ended up kind of being a county priority was put into it. You know, that might not have happened if the EDC had been in charge of that incubator, but, you know, instead of having companies, we got HOC there. I'm not criticizing, really. I'm just saying, like, when these functions are held inside a county, they end up falling prey to county realities or county priorities.
If they're not put in the right sort of structure. And the way that the pieces are remaining now, there's not a correct structure there. But when you see consolidation candidate, to your other question, it's not a consolidation of back to EDC. The mindset and the thinking of the administration is now that EDC is just up and running the way that we want them to focus on exactly what they're good at.
I know,
And
but
so
I'm disagreeing with that very strongly.
Okay.
I think the administration is seeking to take back into government bureaucracy the intersection between the private and the public sector for economic development. And I'm totally opposed to that. I just want to let you know, I'm going to fight tooth and nail. We're not recreating the failed Department of Economic Development with staff that got failed upward from, the whatever department, that we don't want to do that again. Please.
I understand. And no one's proposing a new economic development department, but I just want to make it clear that this particular function never went anywhere.
It hasn't gone there yet, but we still want it to go. We want the EDC to take over incubation, innovation, unless the EDC says, I'm sorry, we don't want to do that for whatever their logic, but that's the kind of place for these kinds of functions where you're nimble, you're moving contracts quickly, you're appealing to people with that kind of experience, and it's just, it would not be a great recommendation to say, let's bring that back in the house. We've been doing that. It has never left the house. We've been doing that. It hasn't worked that well. I was really happy that you asked the EDC to take on the Innovation Center study. I thought that was a great move. And so I just want to say I think that we ought to continue to expand their role in this arena and not try to reverse course there. All right, I just wanted to say that.
Really noted.
Mr. Friedson.
So let me start with a positive. I appreciate in the chart the Office of Agriculture staying as the Office of Agriculture. The Office of Agriculture and agriculture itself is a critical industry for us. It is a key part of our economic development, but it is a unique part of the economic development, and I appreciate and I think it's very important that stays as an independent agency, and we don't have to relitigate that conversation, which did take place during the question of where do we move forward as we're privatizing the Economic Development Corporation. So I just want to make a strong push that continues, that not be considered a candidate for consolidation, that the Office of Agriculture is critical to those in the agriculture industry. It's a very specialized part of our economy, and I'm pleased that is listed that way, and I am hopeful that continues. So I just wanted to make sure I note that. So let me start big picture, and then I'm going to get into specific questions. Big picture is we have focused exclusively now, 8 months in, to the trees of economic development without any understanding of where the forest is. And so that is my broad-based concern, that I don't know when we get out of the tree conversation of individual aspects of economic development and we start talking about what is the administration's strategic view of what economic development is, who is responsible for it, how we measure it, and how we work together to promote it. And so it's more of a comment than a question, but that is the global concern that I have had from the beginning of, one by one, piecemeal by piecemeal, we get, here's the plan for the regional services centers being a bigger part of economic development. On this chart, we have a conglomeration of consolidation candidates that may or may not go a certain way. We have a new deputy director of housing and a new housing director. The housing director was supposed to be the economic development director until it wasn't, and now it's back to being two people who do housing at the top two political appointee positions at that department. And so what I'm very interested in is of when we can expect, and I know it's complicated and I know it's difficult, and I respect the fact that if it was easy, somebody would have done it before. I think your point is well taken, and I know that you haven't been here the whole time and that you are working very hard, and I am pleased with your efforts. But I think at a certain point, there has to be a message, a clear, concise, consistent message from the administration to the council and, more importantly, to the public of here are our thoughts, here is where we're headed, here are our goals, and let's have a conversation on those strategic goals, as opposed to one by one assessing whether or not we should approve a position, one by one whether or not we should approve a shift of a few $100,000 from one account to another. So I don't know if you have a comment on that, but it's more of just a general statement of mine of, if you're asking like where is the frustration that I have, that is where it is largely as a result of the fact that we've got to get out at a certain point of talking just about individual trees and talk about what is the goal for the forest that the county executive has for economic development.
Absolutely, and thank you for your comments. And I share your frustration as someone who is in this topic area on a daily basis, and I know that it is far from perfect or in a way that we all would like for it to be right now. But the plan has always been to update the comprehensive economic development strategy in October of 2019, which it must be updated by regulation. So that is when you will get a plan and a strategy as it relates to the administration and what the goals are, and some metrics in there as well, and ownership in there as well. But in the absence of waiting for October, which will be almost a full year since the administration took over, we have been trying to provide you updates and give you information along the way so that you would know our thoughts and desires as we move forward. It would be inappropriate of us, in my opinion, for us to just wait until all of that gets done and then kind of just put it on you, as opposed to say, these are the pieces that we're trying to move forward from a small business standpoint, from a business resource hub standpoint. The staffing standpoint, I understand and I get it, and there will always be staffing that we need to shift and make adjustments and different accountabilities for. But the administration is working daily to see if we can make sure that economic development not only gets the attention that it needs from the government, but making sure that the residents are actually being impacted in a more positive way.
Are those decisions based on a broader strategy that will be memorialized and formalized as part of the comprehensive economic development plan in October, but are part of the intentional, thoughtful process by which, because if that is the case, it hasn't been shared with us to this point?
I will say yes, and I also will say, as we are, going through the prior economic development strategy, there's not a reinvention of a wheel there. There is a prioritizing what wants to get done and creating strategies and then putting the right resources in place to execute on those strategies. So I don't want to make it sound like the October plan is going to be something that is just so far off of the beaten path.
Yeah, I think, just in terms of timing and process, and I talked about it earlier with the housing piece, and it's related because that was part of this broader consideration for economic development changes within, from my understanding, based on comments that have been made to us and in public elsewhere, that was part of the thought process for DHCA, which is no longer part of the process. And so while I appreciate the fact that you don't want to wait and sit around and miss a budget cycle, I am very concerned that I think that these things haven't been figured out, that final decisions haven't been made. And while I appreciate that they're complicated and they take time, to begin the process of making significant changes before those final determinations have been made in the absence of a real cohesive and comprehensive strategy, to me is troubling. And until we get a very specific plan and understanding for how these puzzle pieces fit together, to me, it will look like random puzzle pieces sitting in the middle of the floor without any understanding of what the box looks like of the puzzle of what the picture is supposed to be. And that means you're just literally throwing puzzle pieces down on the floor, hoping that you can find two pieces that fit together with each other, and that is not a process that I'm particularly
Puzzles,
comfortable
ships
with.
going out to sea, trees and forests.
Yeah,
Got any more up that sleeve there, buddy?
Plenty. There's plenty. Yeah, trains on the track is Mr. Joanna's. I like metaphors, so I appreciate that. I'm trying to symbolize my frustration through very specific comparisons. Couple questions. No, it's all right.
I gotta say
I'm here
there,
for a hard time.
I'm not sure that when a strategy is presented as comprehensive, you may agree.
I may not,
So-
but I'm okay. My biggest thing is I'm okay disagreeing with the plan. My concern is not that I disagree with the plan. It's I don't even know what the plan is because I'm not convinced that there is one.
So
That's what's disagreement is fine, but we have to have something to disagree over. And right now we don't have anything to disagree over. We just have a number of what seem to be random decisions that I think could have merit, but I can't evaluate them in a thoughtful or comprehensive way because there's no understanding of where they fit into a broader idea or a broader strategy. And that was the concern that I had during the budget process of how this was presented, which was presented in, I think, perhaps the most confusing possible way of moving the incubator
Can I join
money.
the
And
conversation
please,
for a moment?
please.
I mean, I think that, and I'll, Mr. Fletcher, you of course respond, but I also think that the council needs to take initiatives and try to drive this train as well. I think it can be coming from both sides of Route 28 here, but, you know, there'll be contributions that the executive branch makes. I think the council can make contributions too.
Absolutely. And what I would say is there is a comprehensive economic strategy that the prior administration had submitted in November of 2016 that the government is working underneath. So there is a plan in place. I'm not sure if it's been shared with this particular group of council members, but there is a plan in place that all of the county government, as it relates to economic development, is operating under. And
So the incubator decisions, the regional service center, business hub decisions, I mean,
well, those are probably some of the newer initiatives of the current administration as they still continue to execute on the plan. But I don't want you to think that there's no plan in place as of right, nor there has not been a plan in place. You know, as these pieces right here, we attempt to become more centralized and more focused. You know, there is still a plan, an overall arching plan that guides what we do.
I've looked through the 2016 comprehensive plan. I'm not convinced or have yet to be made clear that any of the decisions that had been framed by the administration as decisions related to economic development have related to that plan as a way to better execute that plan. And so in the absence of that, then I just have to presume that there's a new plan. And the new plan has a new strategy. And that new strategy, my point is, hasn't been shared with us. And it's not the fact that I think you necessarily need to have a formal plan presented to the council before October, but it hasn't been shared what that formal plan is going to look like. For instance, the general plan, which isn't done, we have an idea of the general framework that they are entering into those conversations with. There is a strategy that has been shared with the council of here are the three main areas that this general plan is going to focus on. Here's the process by which we're going to undergo it. And so it's not that we got a draft of what the general plan is going to be. That is a very long and complicated process, but we do know what the thinking is. We do know what the strategy is going to be, and we do have a basic framework for what the process is going to look like. None of that, I think, has been shared with us. Again, this isn't a criticism of you. This isn't your fault. I think you are doing the absolute best you can and are doing an admirable job of trying to sell individual pieces to us at individual points in time. But the problem is these are just, to me, random snapshots where you're coming over here and doing your best to advocate for the position of the county executive, which I think is, and I think you do a good job of it. It's just my perspective is no matter how talented you are and how successful you are in advocating for those positions, I personally, as a council member representing residents, can't evaluate those individual positions in the absence of how they fit into a broader strategy. Can I just, I'm going to get to questions, but I can turn. All right, sure. I have a couple quick questions. I'll go after. I'll go after. Okay.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Fletcher.
Good morning.
So I want to just, I share the concern on the comprehensiveness and, you know, and some analysis of what's working and what's not, I hope is included in the plan, because I think if you're going to propose these changes, which again, I am open to considering the proposals, and just to be clear on that point, Gene, to make these changes, we would need to approve these, correct?
Correct, in some form or manner. Obviously, if the executive wants to send over a reorganization plan, that would require legislation to be approved. Alternatively, if it came over through budget maneuvers, and this has happened during the last year's budget for the regional service centers and the business solutions group, where the appropriation was moved from one department or office to another, obviously the council approves both of those.
Right. So I think that just underscores the point. You want to have some buy-in and some understanding, right, on this side of the street, because we're going to need to approve them. So And then, so for me, critical to that is an analysis of what's working and what's not. And I'll use the example of the workforce development and WorkSource Montgomery, which obviously the council president and I, along with a couple others, introduced a bill to expand the capacity of who that workforce development entity is. You've been involved in these conversations.
Yes, sir.
But here it's listed as everything staying the same. So I don't, to my point of kind of the analysis of what's working and what's not, I feel like that's a chart here that if you're going to propose a change, there needs to be a robust discussion of, okay, what do we think is working and what is not, and why are we changing it? And in the case of workforce, where I've been in part of those discussions, that's not even represented here. So could you speak to that?
Well, in this chart, and you're right, it was not updated, but what I would say is that, the council has exercised its flexibility in adding different language in that would allow the county government to go in a different direction of a provider. The county itself has made sure that there's what they call a kick-out clause in the contract that we have for fiscal year 20 as WorkSource continues to provide their duties as they go forward in case a different direction is decided as well. In the case of WorkSource and what they do and what they're providing, we have to keep moving forward with what they are doing to make sure that there's no gaps in the service that is already being questioned by certain people as of today. And there has been no decision that has been made as to who and exactly how and exactly when any of that would change. I would say that as being a part of those conversations, it was clear that we wanted to make sure that we were protected with what decision was made in the future. And as of today, no decision has been made as of now.
Well, that's fine with work. I get that on WorkSource, but I have the larger point of the analysis of why you want to make the change and what you think is working and what's not, as in part with the plan that Councilmember Friedson is talking about. And obviously, I understand, getting the full update in October, but I think to the extent that you can provide us some of that rationale now or in some sort of written form, it's going to help as we're getting more comfortable with what potential changes you're asking us to make. I know the the council chair here has made his voices known on the small business and entrepreneurship and incubator. But I personally, as a council member, I'd love to hear what the plan is, and I'm open to hearing what it is. And it is currently within the county government. It's not working well. So, okay, then what are we going to do? And before we can say, yep, let's keep it there, I think we need to know those answers to those questions.
And those are the same questions we're asking internally as well, which is why I didn't have a more comprehensive update to supply to the committee. We still are gathering information and data and certain definitive, what I would call justifications or even assumptions that we have to make in order to make some of these changes. But in the absence of those, in the absence of that, what I would call supporting documentation, we would just be telling you, this is the path that we want to go in. We made a decision and we're exploring it. So the deliberate thought process is to, even though there has been some things that have been said publicly, we are now trying to make sure that we can support those statements and that direction with information.
So that's when we'll get in October, is what you're saying.
I hope you will get some of that before then, but I don't want to piecemeal it, as I understand. But, we do want to give it to you as soon as we get it. I'd hate for a decision to be made in August. Then we go through the right budget circles, the right communication circles, and then don't sit and talk to you about it until late October. I mean, that would be missing a window of time.
I'd agree. I agree. Okay, so I'll pause there. I have other questions, but I want to kick it back over to Councilman Freeze because I know he has questions. But on this point in particular, I would highly encourage, to have that discussion either formally or informally as soon as you have a better sense.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to separate one issue. I'm much more open to the small business technical assistance and that kind of support being inside the county government because there's so many county government pathways that need to be navigated there. It was more the entrepreneurship and the incubator that I was saying. I think we ought to not try to run that in-house. Mr. Friedson.
Thanks. So speaking of the incubator, because it's been brought up many times, I had a lot of concerns about the way that was presented and the process for moving forward. Where are we? My understanding is the goal was to hire an expert,
Yes.
somebody who really knows how to do incubator programs, bring that person in to guide this process? Do we have somebody on board? Is there an RFP that's going out? What's the process for that?
The RFP should be complete by the end of this week. It's a two-step RFP, not only with the incubator, but also the entrepreneurial support that we want to include in it. They both are connected, so we wanted one consultant to do one study as opposed to two separate studies, and the scope of work will be finished by the end of this week.
Isn't it the EDC that's putting it out, though?
Yes, they are, and they're also working with us on the scope of
They're
service.
collaborating with you closely, but they're
Right.
actually doing the
Solicitation.
pen on paper and the solicitation.
Yes.
They're doing the solicitation. Who's paying for it?
We are paying for it.
The budgeted funds through the budget process, but they're handling the process.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Just based on their ability to procure it quicker, so we don't sit here and say, well, now it takes another 6 months for us to actually get a consultant on board.
I think that speaks to the chair's point of why that probably makes a lot of sense, and I associate myself with some of his comments related to this. But speaking of that, if you keep us updated, by the way, on the timing, not just of when the RFP is going to come out, we can ask the EDC as well, but when we expect to have the evaluation done, when we expect to have somebody on board, and then how long that engagement is expected to be, in terms of when do we expect to get something, in terms of a report of, what this actually looks like, because obviously it's a big priority for all of us. Where it's housed and how it works is a question, but I think we are all share an interest on both sides of the street of actually making this program work and having it be a modern incubator program that isn't just about space.
Okay.
Which is historically was the biggest challenge and no longer is, I think, the biggest challenge for most businesses with the way the private sector has moved. So speaking of that and speaking of the EDC, you mentioned earlier, and the chart kind of references the question of what they do really well and what we would do well. How do we measure that? What are we determining of what the EDC is currently doing well, what the county is currently doing well, what is working and what isn't working?
Well,
This kind of speaks to what Councilmember Jawanda was saying as well, but you seem to say there's certain things we know what's working and what's not working. What's that based off of?
Right. Well, we know that, whether it's, we can measure for number of net new businesses that are created, number of businesses that are attracted, businesses that are retained within the county. We have certain output measures that we can measure from EDC, but when we say what they do well, they are a marketing company that is designed to promote the assets of the county to bring others here. So from that standpoint, that's what we want them to do and to focus on. And the idea is that by making sure that they are focused on that, then it would not divert some of their other attention to other things like the small business and incubator, which we feel like are things that the county should handle. So they shouldn't even have to worry about those things.
But if I'm just trying to understand this. We largely are recognizing the fact that a lot of people don't think the incubator program is working as it could or should. The county is currently handling that part of the business, that economic development business. If we're looking at things that the EDC does well and saying they should keep it, and looking at things that you perceive based on presumably some tangible measurements that you have determined of what success does and doesn't look like, I think it'd be helpful if that was formally shared with us of what those decisions are based off of, to Councilmember Jawando's point. But I think that you also then have to be honest of what the county does well and doesn't do well. And if the incubator program is a non-starter for the EDC to take that over, when we know that the program currently as being run by the county is not doing as well as we would like, then I don't think that is the way that it should be approached. I think that the consultant should come in and say, what is the best practice? How would this work? And the EDC should be on the table, the county should be on the table, some other arrangement should be on the table. And I would hope that you aren't predetermining the decision by a subject matter expert that we're paying taxpayer dollars to provide their expertise. And the county isn't telling this person that this is where we want your report to land. Tell us how we should land there. It should be, we don't know how to do this. We're not very good at it. Tell us how to do it, and then we'll try to execute based on what you tell us is the best practice nationally.
True. And I would say, very good point. We are not looking for confirmation, we are looking for information, and I have not heard it said in that way, but yes, if the study comes back and says that EDC is the proper landing spot for these duties, then yes, the county would definitely take that under consideration. It is not predetermined that the incubator in this example has been decided where it will reside.
Great. And then are there going to be, I mean, we've budgeted a certain amount of money for the EDC. Are there going to be any changes to their scope of responsibilities during this budget year?
At this time, we are still currently evaluating how they allocate their dollars to the different functions that they provide. I would say, I've heard both sides of it. I've heard that once we see that, we might decide they need more money to do what we want them to do extremely well at. Or it could result in someone saying, well, now that you're not doing X and those things are now being done by the county, that we would like a piece of that back. But none of that has been made and none of that has been decided. It is just an evaluation.
So do you anticipate that evaluation to result in a budget change that would come before the council during this budget year, or do you expect that to result in a revised budget request for fiscal year 21?
Well, I don't know if we submitted one for fiscal year 21, but it would probably most likely affect fiscal year 21.
Got it. Okay. I would hope that if there are any changes, since we appropriated money at the council, and that's our responsibility based on certain scope of responsibilities, that any changes that are going to happen, if they're going to happen during this budget year, that there be a formal presentation to the council and approval of those changes.
You would be the first to know.
Okay, I appreciate that commitment. So you mentioned that no one is proposing a new Department of Economic Development. The chair has made his views on that very clear. So what are you proposing? Because I'm confused as to what consolidation means. To me, consolidation means the creation of a new department specifically focused on this, or consolidating under the umbrella of another department. Since the housing department has already moved in a certain direction and is not being run by somebody who has extensive economic development experience, has more community development experience, which, like I said earlier, I think are very different. What would that look like if it's not a new department?
So the consolidation can go in one or two ways. You can either add to a department that you have and make it stronger, or you can separate something out of it and then create like a new. What we've kicked around internally is just like an office of business and community services that would allow not the economic development functions that EDC maintains, but more of the small business, community development, neighborhood revitalization, those sort of issues that we actually still control, maintain largely within the county, to be housed under one central place of leadership. The biggest piece is...
So it would be a new department, it just wouldn't be called the Department of Economic Development?
It would be a new office or department. It would not be called the Economic Development Department because it's not economic development solely focused. It would be something different.
And that would potentially include like community development block grants that would be taken out of DHCA?
It would, not the block grants. The block grants themselves, I think, would probably stay where they are, but now you're asking questions that we're asking ourselves, which we don't have all the answers to, but I can answer them as much as you want me to.
How about the regional service centers' role in this and the business hubs? I thought the whole plan was to move a lot of the technical assistance for small businesses to the regional services centers. Would the regional services centers report to this new office or department, or that would be a separate non-consolidated part of the consolidation plan?
That is yet to be determined.
Okay, all right. So I think this reinforces my confusion. I think my confusion is probably not just because I don't understand these things. I think it's largely because we don't know where these things are headed. That was the reason why I had concerns with some of the changes that were made during the budget. If we don't know what the new department or office is going to look like, it's hard to then move things into the regional service centers, only to then move them again to another new department. I don't know how that works and what that plan was. So last question, and then I'll turn to my colleagues, and I apologize for taking up so much time here, but what does in progress mean? It's confusing to me looking at the chart to see something as a consolidation candidate, which means that you're considering consolidating it to some new department and then saying that it's in progress. Is it moving? Is it not moving? Is it going to change? Is it not going to change?
Right, so.
Seems to contradict, the second to last column and the last column seem to contradict each other, or at least are not clear to me.
Well, the time frame column in progress simply just means that the duties that are in question are currently being performed within either the county, EDC, workforce development in this conversation, that they are being given as proper attention on a regular basis to make sure that we execute and try to move all of it forward. It does not mean anything is languishing or anything is just sitting while we are trying to make our decisions.
So that's just connoting that these are current functions of the county government, but where they are located?
Consolidation
Like-
candidates.
Like in progress for,
Because the only one that is not in progress is entrepreneurship development. So are you trying to say that we do everything now, we're just not sure where we're going to do it or how we're going to do it? So those are in progress, but we're going to add entrepreneurship development, which you said earlier is now part of the incubator study? Is that what this says?
correct. Entrepreneur development, we don't believe is being done the way we envision it either at EDC or within the county. It's part of something we want to build and grow on. But the other,
So the takeaway from this is we want to add entrepreneurship development as part of our economic development strategy. Is that?
Yeah.
And then there are a bunch of things that are consolidation candidates that we don't know where they're going to go or how they're going to work, but we are asking questions about them and trying to figure that part out.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I wanted to just make a general point, and then I'll pass it on. I've heard you refer, and I've heard the county executive himself refer a number of times to the EDC as it's a marketing agency, and that's what they do. I really disagree with that characterization. It is a much broader organization. It has a much broader mission. It is our group of experts in the county around economic development. It is an entity that does engagement with the business community, whether they're not necessarily marketing to people outside, but they're talking to companies and executives and figuring out what they need. It's providing strategic advice on policy. I think it should also run the incubators, support entrepreneurship programs. It can have a very wide array of functions. I think the executive may want it to become just a marketing entity. It's quite possible that's where he thinks it should go. But again, I don't think that's where we should go. So I just want to keep repeating this until the issue is joined at some point if there's a proposal that is made.
And I would say I agree with you, but the thought process of where we are right now is to not overburden this fledgling corporation with everything in the kitchen sink right now. But to say, in an ideal world, sure, if it was done ideally a few years ago, they would have gotten everything and they would be doing everything. But at this point in time, if the decision is made that, well, you're not doing everything well, let's make sure that we don't overwhelm you with everything and give you enough so that you can truly be successful. And then, let's just say hypothetically, in the future, you add other pieces to it so that then they're growing year by year. That could be one of the thought processes.
Sure. I just wanted to make my point there.
And I have two related questions, but on that point, I agree. If you look at the funding, we had MCEDC before us. We talked about what they're doing, how they're measuring themselves, and if you just take the marketing, the business attraction and retention and expansion, the numbers weren't great that I saw. As far as several years in, and I know they were starting up, but what they've actually been able to do with that limited scope of mission. So and do they have the resources to do these other things is another question. I think the answer is no currently. So we need to have that discussion. I withhold judgment on where I'll land on where these things should be, but I share the concern that I haven't been blown away by how they've used their resources and what they've produced to date. So you don't have to respond to that unless you want to.
Of course. What I would say is, and if that's the case, if we haven't been blown away by it, why not make sure that they have the time and attention to focus on that, which at the core of any EDC, those are the core values. You can start going and adding incubators and small business to it, but at the core, An EDC is designed to attract businesses to a community. And if we're not blown away by it, then the thought process is we'll let them focus on it to blow us away, and then we'll add more to you after you get past that hurdle.
Logically makes sense. I think we need to still know your thinking, but I understand the logic. Two things that I want to suggest. I know you've been talking about, we have a kind of a white oak plan. We have a White Flint or Pike District plan. I'll try to give my colleague use his name as well. But do we have what's our up county strategy, and how are we? What steps are being taken to consider the needs of the up county economy? There's not really a signature. Or let me ask: have you all discussed that? Let me ask that.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Well, I'd love to inject that into your conversations. I think, I'm an at-large member, and I've been talking to people up there. I'm just about to do a business tour up there, and I just want to make sure that we are, as we're thinking about the holistic needs of the county, that region, the up county, is part of the overall strategy. Obviously, there's an incubator up there, so I think we just need to specifically be thinking about what the strategy is for up county.
Okay. Yes, sir.
As part of the comprehensive plan that you're going to, bring back in October. The other thing is around communications. Now, I know MCDC does marketing. We constantly hear, we just were talking about the business climate here. We hear the comparisons about we're this, we don't have this, everything's not great here. I think there has to be, as part of what the county government is doing, and I'll put ourselves in this category, there has to be a communication strategy around what we are doing well, what we're changing. The 4 business things were great, but I feel like there's still not a comprehensive communications strategy to go along with the specific marketing of the county which is very targeted, what MCDC is doing to businesses. I think there needs to be a larger business climate communication strategy, and so I don't know if I wanted to suggest that we be doing that and ask, are those conversations happening? And I think that's going to take some thought and some resources, and I think it's something that's a worthwhile effort.
And yes, and thank you for bringing that up, because we are working on that, and we are having several conversations with our PIO and Barry Hudson and his team. We've had several meetings regarding how we can get some of the good news that Montgomery County actually has out to the public. We are letting others tell our story, and we are believing the rhetoric of everything that they say when there is positive and great news to share from the county. But if we don't get it out there, then we're missing an opportunity. So we are having those meetings. We'll come up with a communication strategy, and we'll be happy to let you know and include you in it once we get there.
Great, and I think the research of the planning department. Let's think broadly government-wide. There's a lot of stuff that we were briefed on this morning, and other things that I think should be incorporated into that. So, all right, thank you very much.
All right, I think we'll wrap up here, but I wanted to just follow up a little bit on my colleague's comments. We reviewed the Economic Development Corporation early this year in the conversation where we were learning about the job numbers. And the job numbers for the last 2 years have been absolutely shocking. And the EDC is not something that can turn that around. That's a fundamental, structural, strategic challenge. The council, the government, can turn that around if we get smart about how we do economic development. And that is where I think the EDC comes in partly to provide us with advice and to have a much healthier, more fluid intersection between the public sector and the private sector, which is why we're doing, for example, our meeting this week with the Business Roundtable, is to have that conversation. I think the last thing we want is to retreat back into a government bunker where we don't have people who have that private sector mindset. If we replace all those staff with people who have more of a government mindset, and then when we turn to people for our advice and our strategic direction, we don't really get the benefit of that kind of thinking. And that's what concerns me about the executive's overall vision here. When we talk about economic development, the executive talks about reorganizing government bureaucracies. Is a very inward-focused vision, and I think it's going nowhere. personally. That's my view of it all. But, you know, and so I'm going to fight any effort to swap out the more nimble, thoughtful, I think, savvy approach that we have in our intermediary or our nonprofit and bring that in. But I will draw the distinction with small business support, which is often about permitting or procurement or, street signs or urban district cleaning. Like those kinds of issues that's what government needs. Those are problems government needs to solve. And I'm there with you on an approach there to streamline that. And we can beef that up too. I mean, we had to create, I was the co-author of the legislation that created the Business Solution Group that is now underlying that because we had a gap. If we only had a nonprofit and an economic development corporation, then we would have a gap. We wouldn't have that intersection that the business community needs. So I'm not saying it's all one or the other, but I do think we have to expand our investments, and I think we need to be looking to expand the EDC, talking about more commercialization in our federal labs, talking about a new cybersecurity program, taking over the incubator program, building new entrepreneurship programs. I think that's where I would like this committee to drive the agenda, and I hope the executive and the committee can work together on those kinds of initiatives. I'm sure we can. And there's a lot of work ahead of us. I don't know what this comprehensive strategic plan. I was also the co-author of the legislation that created that in the first place. I thought it was helpful in the last, generation, and it could play a helpful role in this generation. I'm not sure it's going to answer the kinds of questions necessarily. It wasn't the intent to be so operational, but you may find that you are in a place where you're presenting your operational recommendations as you have worked your way through that process, perhaps. But we'll see what we find in the fall. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just to be clear, I want to make sure that these things get done. I think we all do, including entrepreneurship and incubation. I just want to make sure that we have the right people in place to do the three things that MCDC was already supposedly doing and getting good outcomes. Obviously, they can't change the whole economy, but they can control how many businesses they've talked to and who they went to and who they, and those are some of the, how they're spending their marketing money, and what are the return on investment. I had some questions about, what are we getting back for the $500,000 on Facebook, and so those are things that I want to hold them equally accountable, but I also don't think the answer is necessarily hire another government bureaucrat to do incubators. I'm glad you're doing the study and getting the consultants. So wherever we put it, I'm more agnostic on that. I just want to make sure they have the expertise and the resources to get it done.
Because that's the right distinction, right? Let's look at your marketing program. Let's figure out if we think that's the best marketing program. Right. That, I think, is absolutely on target. I think that the conversation got a little bit carried away before where people were saying, well, if the job number is as bad, then we, obviously it's the EDC that's to blame. And, let's be fair here. Like, the EDC is a new entity and it can't change the whole economy, trends, overnight. These are long-term issues. But I think that's where we should be focusing our EDC accountability. And I'm glad you drew that distinction. Let's make sure we follow up in that kind of mindset.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else, Gene, that we missed?
No, I do want to add one item with this economic development strategy. Obviously, it's required to be submitted to council by October. However, it's required to be a Method 1 regulation. So for those listening at home and for the committee and et cetera, the regulation would have to be posted on the register, the county's register, by the latest is September, in order for that to sit for the month on the register for.
And a Method 1 means that
the council must approve it for it to go into effect.
And so that becomes a collaborative process.
It certainly does. And so I think, given the amount of time spent, it's just one, noting that the vision will be submitted earlier than October for the public to see. And then two, once the council gets it, it does not necessarily mean that it could be a fast process. The council will go through it and must approve it before it to go into effect, and that could take time.
So the executive branch, you've got that's a pretty soon deadline. To me, that sounds like I've got a thesis due on Monday. But as my colleague just commented, there's a lot of focus around two-year budgeting in the executive branch. Let's put some brain power into this one as well. You got a big job ahead of you, Mr. Fletcher, but you're more than up to the job.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you so much. Have a good day.